Hello and welcome to another episode of Game Develop Repeat. I'm Chris, and today we're talking about Cult of the Lamb. Cult of the Lamb is actually a pretty tricky game for me to cover on here because normally I get invested in one specific game mechanic that I'm really into, like the combat in Legend of the Dragoon, or just my obsession with fishing mini games, or the incredible character development in Spiritfarer. Like, I tend to pick one thing and just dive deep. Cult of the Lamb, there's no one specific mechanic that I feel the urge to dive deep on. Rather than one specific mechanic, it's more of a interconnected web of mechanics. So I'm going to try to tackle that interconnected web without going too far in one direction at any time and making it kind of confusing to listen to. I'm going to try to do the same thing that I feel they've done with the game, honestly. I'm very tempted to go in on any one mechanic and start rambling about this, that, or the other. But in the same way that the game doesn't focus way too heavily on one thing, I'm going to try not to focus way too heavily on one thing. So the core gameplay of this game, let's get into that. The core gameplay loop is essentially you go into a dungeon, so to speak. You go into a different environment. You fight enemies with a randomized weapon. You roll around, you dodge, you have action combat, you try not to die, you get through, you beat a boss, you come back to your cult, you do some cult management, you make sure they have what they need, you give them a little sermon, you go through this whole preaching thing, do any little side activities that you want to do, make sure that they're good to go and that they'll be fine while you're in the dungeon again, and then you go back into the dungeon, repeat until you beat the game. Just to kind of simplify it, there's that makes it sound a lot less flavorful than it is. There's a lot of flavor to this game. There's a lot of appeal. The art style is great. It's got that creepy cute thing going where it's really cute, but there's also a lot of creepy things. There's also a lot of gross things. There's a dark heavy theme. There's all of that going on, which is kind of uncomfortable but cool and adorable at the same time. It's nice. It's good. I'm a big fan of that aesthetic. So it's got that, and then it's also just got very tight controls. So one thing that I noticed is when I was going through the dungeons, I never had that experience that I'm sure we all had where you're like, I dodged. I definitely dodged. I saw myself dodge and it still hit me. This is nonsense. This game isn't doing what I'm telling it it's doing. Blah, 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 right? Where you're like, this is the controls are not responding properly to me. I think you run into that a lot in action style games. That's not an issue with the combat in this. I felt like the combat was tight, and anytime that I got into a tight, a sticky situation, it was because there was either too much going on and I just couldn't manage it, or I just made some dumb mistake or whatever. I never felt like the game was cheating me in the combat, which is huge. That is such great polish, and I really appreciate that. And that might even be the theme of what is going on with this game, is just polish, because it is pretty well refined. I believe this was released in early access. I did not play it in early access. I only played it after official release. There's some indication that they're going to continue releasing content for it for free. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I got the impression that they're going to keep releasing content based on the Steam page and the game. When I loaded it up and clicked on there was some button in the main menu that I clicked on that made it open a dialog box that was like, hey, we're still working on other stuff. Anyway, the combat felt smooth and the base management felt pretty smooth to me as well. So those core mechanics are pretty well polished. Now, as far as the cult management, base management stuff goes, you can like do some decorative stuff. You can build certain buildings that'll help you a little bit whenever you do the dungeon diving. Everything that you're doing when you're working on the cult feels like it is either a cool thing that you can do that is visually satisfying, or it is something that helps you with your run. So there's a payoff. You never feel like you're just wasting time keeping your cult going. At least I didn't. It feels like there's good reason to keep working on your cult, and it feels like you're not wasting your time. Which is good. I mean, the last thing you want is for a large element of a game like that to end up becoming any kind of a grind, right? There's a tricky thing to this game where you have to make sure that everything is appealing enough that if somebody doesn't love some aspect of the game, they're not going to feel forced to play it. Or when they are forced to play it, it's mild enough that it doesn't make them quit. This is a problem I've had with other games where, like, when you smush genres together too much, one of those genres may not be somebody's favorite thing, and that might be like, you know what, I love most of this game, but this genre, like this, I just don't like doing this type of puzzle, and I keep having to do it, so I'm gonna stop playing this game because I'm done with these puzzles, I'm fed up with it, I'm out. That is the danger of these kind of genre mashups, and I think that Cult of the Lamb really rides that line very well. My feeling was that, and maybe it's just because I like both of these genres, but maybe they just picked two good genres. Maybe they picked something where there's a lot of fan overlap. I don't know. But my experience with it was, this is enjoyable, and whenever there's a moment when it feels kind of dull, I can pretty quickly just move over to the part that I want to do. Like, I never felt like I was stuck doing a thing I didn't want to do. I always felt like I could just go, okay, whatever. I don't want to do that right now. I'm just going to click these 3 buttons and then go do the other thing instead. No worries. Having said that, actually, let's get into the development section of this, because I feel like we're about to start talking about the kind of game development lessons from this anyway. So let's move on to that section. I think the biggest lesson that I'm learning from Cult of the Lamb is about blending genres, putting mini games inside of other games, and like balancing difficulty. And I think there's just so much meat on these bones. I think there's just so much information in this game about how to balance and how to make something appealing even when it spans across multiple genres, and like how the most important thing in the world is not that the game is hard, but that the game is entertaining. Adaptive difficulty settings is having multiple difficulty settings is great, so that people can set it for themselves. But if we're being honest, it's pretty common for you to just click normal. Like, not many people are gonna be like, you know what, I don't know. I think it's pretty typical to just click normal mode and be like, I assume that the developer knows what they're doing and knows how difficult the game is for me specifically, which is like a big assumption, but developers happen to do a pretty good job with it. So yeah, I think the big takeaway is about mixing genres. So let's let's dig into what I'm talking about with this game specifically on mixing genres. I mean, we already know that it's mixing like a management game with a roguelite. The key for me was that neither of them got in the way of the other at any point. I have played so many games, and I think you have probably experienced this too. I think we've all experienced this, where you're playing this game, you're playing like a friggin' like an action game, and then you have this very intellectual puzzle, or not even very intellectual puzzle. You just have a puzzle that you're not in the mindset for, and you gotta like remember things, and you gotta go to another room and remember the thing from the other room, but you just like fought a bunch of dudes and it's confusing and weird, and you're like, what did I write that down? I should have written that down, and you have to go back and forth and whatever. And it kind of takes you out of it and puts you into this mode where you're like taking notes to play the game. I'm a little bit, I think when Resident Evil does this wrong, they do it very wrong, and then when they do it right, they do it really right. Like Resident Evil is like puzzly and actiony, but there's a lot of potential in those games for it to become very, very frustrating or for it to be extremely rewarding. And I think for the most part, so my experience with Resident Evil is like the early games, for the most part, feels pretty rewarding. Sometimes, though, that kind of thing can get really frustrating. I'm more so thinking of games like, so a classic for me is like you're playing a JRPG, because they got to do this to you. I don't know why. You play a JRPG and they're like, oh, by the way, have you ever played this puzzle game where you click on this one dot and then all the other dots around it flip colors and you have to clear the whole board? It's like, it's kind of a frustrating puzzle, and they just like put it in there. The entire game, you're playing an RPG, and then out of nowhere they're like, oh, you probably like puzzle games, right? Here's one that's going to take a while to figure out. Like, okay, well, now I have to do this. That's kind of annoying. Like, that's kind of an annoying way to do it. Like, if it was a consistent mechanic throughout the game, it's a different thing. Like, there's I don't love it all the time, but when it is pulled off, I do like it. When it's done well, I like it a lot. And I think a lot of that comes down to how much attention you're really paying to the intersection of those two games. Because when you put a mini game like that into your game and you make it mandatory, it is no longer a mini game. It is now part of your core game. And that it has to be designed around that. And I think Cult of the Lamb really designs around that fact. It treats everything as part of the core game. And then they go, okay, if something is too hard, we have to scale it back. And I think that's the one danger of that, is that you could fall into, I mean, I'm sure there's probably more, but the danger that pops in my head is you could fall into this like scaling trap where everything has to be like pretty easy so that no one person can get blocked off. I don't know how, I don't know. That's weird. It's like you lose a little bit of an audience that way because some people want a more difficult game within a certain genre, and like it's whatever. I guess I'm not really worried about the audience side of it anyway. I'm worried about how the game feels. And the game feels good when everything is in balance. As far as like merging game mechanics. Like a nice, ooh, okay, this is a good way to put it. Sometimes adding a new mechanic creates an entirely separate difficulty curve, which you have not prepared your player for. And sometimes the designer assumes that everybody is at a certain skill level with that thing when they are simply not. If the whole game is built around something, you kind of start from the bottom and build up. If you just throw some puzzle into the middle of the game, sometimes it's just, oh, everybody knows how to do this puzzle. And then you're like, I've never done a Sudoku puzzle in my life. Why are you giving me Sudoku right now? Like level 3 Sudoku when I'm a level 0 Sudoku person. And now I have to learn Sudoku. I had this issue on a side quest. Thank God it's a side quest. I had an issue with this on a side quest in Yakuza Kiwami 2 the other day, where the side quest was like playing Mahjong. And I quickly discovered that Mahjong is an extremely complicated game that I have no idea whatsoever how to beat that side quest. And I was just like, well, all right, Yakuza is a game that I don't try to 100%, so I'm just not touching this side quest anymore, I guess. That kind of thing. Crazy sudden difficulty spike is what it is. If that quest was mandatory, if that quest was like, you must beat this guy at Mahjong in order to proceed playing the main story of this game, look, I love that game, but I would stop right there dead in my tracks, not pick it up ever again. Or I would like find a way to cheat because that's just, I'm just not willing to put in that time to learn that game mechanic. And that's the danger. So then in my own design, at this phase, I'm not doing anything intense with mini games. I do want to pop a little fishing mini game into things, but I don't know, like the game I'm currently working on is a platformer. I don't think that's really like a reasonable option at this time. Not that I wouldn't do it. I'm not against putting a fishing mini game inside of a platformer. I think it'd be kind of cute, but I'm just not doing it for this particular game. I don't think. It's just, it's like my first little project. I don't need to be going into minigame city. Anyway, how does this apply to my current development process? I think it's just about thinking about difficulty curves, honestly. Like that has me thinking more about difficulty curves in general. Where are the big peaks of the difficulty of the game? Are there any moments where you throw a new skill at the player without realizing that it's a new skill? I think that's a huge danger. Even with something as simple as a platformer, like, are you expecting them to jump up on a platform from an angle that they've never seen before? If so, like, do they need to do a weird double jump thing? Do they need to rely on coyote time? There we go. There's the word. Do they need to rely on like that coyote time thing where you're jumping when you're actually off of the platform? I don't know if you've heard that term before. That's used a lot in, like, I think it's Game Maker's Toolkit talks about it, where like Celeste has this thing where you get off the platform for a split second, you can still jump even though you're not touching the platform to make it more responsive. Are you setting up stuff so that they have to do that? Because if so, you kind of need to train them to do that, even if it's subconscious. Otherwise, it becomes this big difficulty spike. And that is something that I have been thinking about a little bit in my development, is like how to guide players into these skills that they're going to need to beat the game. And I think that is such an essential skill for game design in general. If you learn how to guide, maybe it's like a level design, like a level progression situation. If you learn how to design your levels and mechanics in sort of an educational way, not through text, that drives me crazy. At least for me, it's not going to be through text. I can't stand it when I'm playing a game. Like I enjoy reading, but not when it's like I'm in the middle of something and then it just, everything pauses, text prompt pops up, read 4 paragraphs. Like, dude, come on. Only when absolutely necessary. So I think designing levels in a way that does that work for you, that shows the player what to experiment with, and then they really learn it rather than just like reading text about it. I think that is a key skill, and that goes across all game mechanics that you're including in your game. Celeste does this beautifully. I talk about Celeste so much. I feel like I'm not even going to be able to make an episode on it individually because I'm going to talk about it so much throughout other episodes. But Celeste does this beautifully, where they introduce different mechanics in a very gradual way and start to like tie them together in a very approachable way. So even though the game is very difficult, the whole time you feel like you are learning and progressing, which is just such great progression, such great design, keeping things like steady and keeping momentum for the player. I think okay, so in my own development at the moment, one of the things that I've been doing over the past week was creating levels, level design. I think I mentioned this in the last episode, doing a lot of level design, trying to get interesting levels with very few mechanics and only like one enemy. I managed to build 10 levels. I also went through and fixed a couple little bugs and added some new fun little bugs that we're going to sort out later, and did some animation stuff. But anyway, these 10 levels, I have them now. And I immediately had to like remake a bunch of them because I played through them and I was like, this is completely wrong. These are in the wrong order. This one shouldn't exist. This doesn't teach the mechanic I meant it to. You can just jump right past it and completely avoid learning that lesson. There's all these little tiny factors that determine whether or not you're actually teaching the player how to play the game. Like, it is literally a case of like, if the player is able to get past that enemy in any way other than the one that you intend them to, they may not learn a mechanic that they need 4 levels down the line. For like first, second level, right? Like very, very early levels, it needs to have one mechanic that you can use to resolve this. And I'm not saying the whole level is just like 100%. Actually, I don't know. I feel like level 1 is kind of just, hey, go this way, do this thing, done, right? For what I'm doing right now, I guess. For a game like In Other Waters, it's actually, even then they do kind of go, there's only one thing you can do right now. You just got to figure out how to do it. I think that's the early game move, is go, you have one goal, figure out how to do that thing. That's how you kind of like create this like experimental tutorial where the player has to experiment to figure out what to do, and then they do it. I'm getting sidetracked, I think. The point I'm trying to make is designing my levels in such a way where the player learns the lesson that they need in order to be able to progress in the future levels, and retains that lesson throughout the levels that they're playing, is tricky. And it is way, way more intricate and detailed than I expected it to be. For some reason, when I started getting into the game development stuff, I was like, I just got to program. That's it. I just got to learn how to program. The other stuff, I'll figure it out, whatever. No problem. Levels, I can make levels. Easy peasy. Just throw some stuff down. I know what a good level feels like. I know what it looks like. Whatever. No problem. No. That was not conscious, by the way. That was just like subconsciously. I was like, levels, whatever. I don't even need to worry about that. No, I got to worry about that. Levels are level design is very like intense and subtle and cool. It's really interesting. But like, man, the amount of detail that goes into that. And it's not like the kind of thing where you're agonizing. I'm making it sound like it's like this hard thing. It's just that you have to go back and review it and go, oh man, that's not going to work, because what if somebody approaches it from this angle? What if somebody's thinking about it this way? What if they don't think to do this? What if they think I'm telling them to block when I'm really telling them to attack? Like, there's so many little hidden messages in the game, and everybody's going to interpret them differently. And the part of this that's really exciting for me is just the sheer amount of potential that kind of hints at. The fact that there are so many interpretations of any one level that you make means that you can, like, once you give your player these fundamental skills, you can kind of open up the world to them without doing that much. Like if you're making a platformer like I am, adding one platform in the right spot can create like 2 more ways to beat the level, or to navigate through the level, to give like different flow. So the the fact that it's so difficult to design something in a very, very linear way, which is what I try to do with the early tutorial levels, means that it's it's very easy to accidentally create a large number of options, which has got to mean that you can really hone in and intentionally create a huge number of really cool options. And that's what I'm excited about, is going in and being like, I know of like 15 ways to clear this level that are all interesting. And they're not like, it's nothing wild. It's just interesting different ways to path it, ways to dodge enemies versus fight enemies, and so on. Um, that's exciting to me. And somehow I got to talking about that from talking about the balance of minigames. But let's go on. Let's give you something a little concrete, a repeatable behavior. Let's move on to this last section of the podcast. All right, so last week I kind of went into a more abstract direction. I started talking about like mindset stuff, and it was very not concrete. I want to give you something a lot more concrete this week. One repeatable behavior that I have been doing recently is I am studying other fields in very small bite-sized chunks. I'm not trying to take a huge amount of time to do it. I'm just trying to do like 10, 20 minutes a day, little phone apps, that kind of thing. Learn a little bit about some other field. So at the moment, I am learning a little bit about like Greek mythology. I'm learning a little bit about Japanese characters like katakana, hiragana, I think they're called. And like I'm learning these things so that I can kind of broaden my horizons a little bit and draw inspirations from other places. I'm one thing I want to learn about is like folklore. I want to learn about like monsters from different cultures. I think that's very relevant to game development. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. And if I can learn a little bit from a ton of different disciplines, who knows what's going to spark something in me that goes, oh, shoot, that's a really good idea. Like, oh, that's exciting. Something that gets me going and gets me going. Oh, that's my next cool project, or that's I can build off of that. Who knows where the inspiration is going to come from, right? So in the spirit of that, and in the spirit of just learning interesting things, because I like doing that, I've been picking up on some miscellaneous stuff, the Greek mythology stuff. At some point, I think I'm going to pick up on some Norse mythology. Yeah, and then a tiny bit of Japanese. That actually has been handy visually. I suspect. I think learning like the shape of these characters is helping me be a little more discerning about visuals, which is something that's important to me because I'm just not that experienced with the visual arts. I've played around a little bit, but like I'm really not, like it is a weak spot for me. Yeah. So that's going to be that's an interesting one for me. So yeah, the repeatable behavior is just regularly learning a little bit about other fields. I have my own ways that I'm doing that at the moment. I've got a couple apps I'm using. I've got Duolingo. I've got it's called Kinnu, Kinnu. I'm using these little things to like pick up on things. Ooh, Anki, I don't know how to pronounce it, Anki, is one of the best ways to like solidify a concept. They're open source, I think. I'm not actually 100%. I think they're open source. They definitely have an open source vibe. That's a really good way to create what's called spaced repetition, to make sure that you retain the things that you pick up. Because if you just like learn things one day, I think it was like within a month, you forget 90% of what you learned, which is crazy. If you just do like a 1-day session, learn a bunch of stuff, and then you don't reuse it, you forget so much of it. So Anki, I can't pronounce it, Anki, is great if you want to do like note cards for stuff that you want to make sure you remember, and it'll just like quiz you on it every so often. And if you get the note card wrong, it'll quiz you on it more often. And if you get it right, it'll space it out better for you. So those are my behaviors that I'm doing to try to expand my horizons a little bit, and hopefully keep getting inspired and keep having ideas. That is everything that I have for you this week. I have, as of the recording of this episode, I have posted the first episode of this podcast. So that's where we're at. I've actually recorded, I posted the first episode 1 week ago as of right now. So we're pretty ahead on the recording schedule. And when I did that, I made a Discord channel. So in the show notes, there is a Discord channel. You can connect with me via Discord. We can start building a little community here. Check it out. Hit me up there. Podcast should be up pretty much on all platforms. I'm having a little bit of trouble with one or two. But that's everything. I will talk to y'all next week. And have a good one. Enjoy creating some stuff out there, and good luck with it.